Hello, and welcome to the first vlog from quarantine, I suppose. We're away from the classroom and we're at home. There are certain perils to working at home, as a number of journalists who report back from far afield can attest to. Most famously, the BBC journalist a few years ago who went viral with a video where his toddler scooted into the frame of the picture whilst he was delivering a report live on BBC, and his wife had to sort of dive into the room and grab the toddler to bring them out. If you haven't seen that, definitely recommend finding it. Maybe I'll link to that below. I shouldn't have any toddlers running in the background, or no crying baby either. That hasn't arrived just yet. But I thought it's a good opportunity for us to do a little vlog, for me to talk about a couple of things media related. And actually, I'm going to try and tie a few bits and pieces together that are kind of current to what I've been doing in the classroom, as well as what's going on in the world as well. In particular, something that happened, I guess, overnight as Monday became Tuesday. I think our world changed completely and will never quite be the same again, I suppose. And I am, of course, referring to the release, I suppose is the correct word, of Disney Plus. The arrival of Disney Plus in the UK. Disney's streaming service, much anticipated. It's been available in most other countries for the past few months, but we've just got it now. Now, I know what you're possibly thinking. I might be talking about the potential conspiracy theories that in a time of lockdown, it's very convenient that Disney Plus has been released. I'm sure they're not hurting from the fact that we're all in our houses, bums on sofas, watching TV quite a lot. Once we're done with our half-hour exercise with Joe Wicks, we might be sticking Disney classics on for the remainder of the day until Joe Wicks comes on again at 9 o'clock. No, I'm not going to be talking about that conspiracy theory. It is one for the conspiracy theorists. So what I'm actually going to talk about is the impact that Disney Plus might have on other broadcasters and other content providers, shall we say. In particular, the broadcaster that we've been discussing in my Year 12 class in the past few weeks, the BBC. And this is something I must admit I hadn't really considered the impact of. But it is interesting because quite often when I ask students to complete a media diary all about corporations and media companies, institutions, there's a media diary called Big Fish, Little Fish, and I ask the students either to pick a small independent production company from any type of media to do some research on, do some analysis of, and find out a bit more about, or I ask them to pick a big corporate, a conglomerate, if you like, and see the impact that they have. And because it's familiar to people, quite a lot of students pick Disney and have a look at that. Now, I've always thought of Disney as, something that obviously aware of its huge scale, how it's got bigger, mainly from a sort of movies perspective, and we talk about that in relation to Curran and Seaton, which I'll come to later, and whether or not it's good to have one company overseeing and owning so much of the film content that's out there. And of course, when we think about that content, we talk about that there is a sort of maybe a lack of imagination because of the amount of reboots, reimagining, sequels, prequels, all the stuff that we usually go on about with this. However, one aspect I didn't consider, in which Disney's dominance in the media marketplace might be a little bit damaging, is something that maybe should have been considered straight away. It's kind of almost hiding in plain sight. And that is Disney's dominance and monopoly over children's TV, which has been the case for many years. So I don't know why it's taken till now to have a think about it. Basically, this was prompted by an article which I'll link to below called "The Disney Plus Juggernaut is Coming for British Children's TV," which sounds very dramatic. It's on the always reliable and interesting Wired magazine website, which deals with all things tech and media and so on and so forth. And the article itself is a really interesting read about the impact that Disney might have on taking audiences from other children's TV broadcasters, how it's launched seemingly at the right time not related to the current situation with the epidemic, but more that it's obviously been studying the market, been looking at how there's been a shift in viewing habits and how technologically audiences are probably ready for this, and are more used to broadcasting, streaming as a viable means of broadcasting. Like I said, it's a really interesting dissection of how Disney's strategy has worked here. A couple of things that come out of this, just a couple of stats and figures that might help to sort of prove the point that they're trying to make, that maybe BBC or kids TV, terrestrial kids TV, like CBBC, and CBBS will suffer because of Disney's dominance, or Disney Plus are here. There was a stat I'm going to read from this, that they measured that in 2010 CBBC had an average viewer engagement of 11 minutes per day. Okay, so on average, a CBBC viewer would engage for 11 minutes, which surprised me. It doesn't sound very much, but I suppose if you figure in what kids are doing and when they're around, fine. That was in 2010. 2018, it reduced down to 5 minutes per day. And they put that impact onto things like YouTube, really, and the fact that kids are more likely to use YouTube. I suppose we've had kids YouTube as well since then, and other streaming services as well. So there has been a real lack of engagement, or a drop in engagement, over the past 8 years, well, from 2010 to 2018. And I suppose the fear is that could reduce even more, okay, which makes it very difficult for the BBC to justify spending more money on that content. Now, the reason this is interesting to us, of course, is we've been looking at the BBC recently, and we've been studying Late Night Women's Hour, which of course is a radio and podcast product. But we look at the BBC in general and its remit and its purpose. And I always start that lesson with a question: what are people's favourite things about the BBC? And often, as a younger audience, I find that there's a less engagement with the BBC than perhaps my generation. But what often comes out from students is children's TV shows, things that they remember from their youth, things that maybe they have younger siblings that still watch. I think anybody in the country will have some sort of nostalgic connection to some kind of BBC children's TV show. I know that I do. From my youth, it was shows like Grange Hill, which will be the same for people younger and older than me, as well as Newsround as well. And obviously there's a huge fondness over the decades and decades gone by for Blue Peter. Although I have to admit, I was never really kind of particular Blue Peter fan, but it's a British institution nonetheless. So, it is an important question. It has an impact on everyone. But I suppose the question that people might ask is, well, does it matter? You've got Disney Plus, which is this absolute, as the article describes it, juggernaut. It is a colossal profit-making company that has, the funds to make huge films and TV shows and franchises. A couple of the big names for kids TV that will be a real appeal to audiences are, just to name a couple, The Descendants Series 3 has had a budget of $15 million, which is colossal for a kids TV show. A show which I hadn't heard of, I must admit, called Zombies, is getting into its second season, which will be highly anticipated. And these are things that are going to have high production values. There'll be quality content for young audiences. So why should we be worried if, are we just saying, well, if kids switch from CBBC to Disney Plus, they're just going to enjoy better programming, a better quality of media? Well, the answer is, it's not that simple, is it? And the other answer is, of course, this does go back to theory, and we can apply things like Curran and Seaton, but also theory of representation within this as well. First of all, to kind of look at Curran and Seaton, and their model obviously argues that the smaller number of companies results in a more homogenised content. Now, we can see that with the film output of Disney, with the limited number of sort of franchises and the similarity of all the movies and so on and so forth, with the fact that there feels like a lack of diversity within the movie content they put out. Okay, so arguably that would transfer down to their content for children's TV as well. And of course that is true to a certain extent, because whilst I've got no problem with at all with the idea that children would be watching a lot of, good quality Disney content. We've all been raised on Disney to some extent. My first ever cinema experience was to go and see Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, not when it originally came out in the 1930s. But we all have that connection with Disney films in the past and somewhat. I've no problem with that. I think it's an important part of everyone's sort of media consumption. However, where we see that lack of diversity, of course, is in representations, particularly representations of who we are. One thing that you can say about children's BBC content is that it's always done whatever it can to reflect back onto those children who they are as British kids. And in fact, it arguably has got better at that over the years to reflect a more diverse representation of young people ethnically, maybe geographically, although there is still some argument to say that children from maybe the north of England and the Midlands don't feel as represented in the content as perhaps children from the south of England do. But the BBC has a responsibility and a remit to address that and to correct that, to make sure as part of their charter, as part of their public service broadcasting responsibilities, that they do represent every aspect of the country. And of course that goes for children as well. So whilst I'm not worried that too much Disney content is going to mean that we'll have an entire generation of young people with American accents or vernacular or colloquialisms, although that does creep in. What I worry about is young people not seeing themselves on screen. The thing about Grange Hill was, okay, it was a bit clunky and it didn't have the highest production values, but it always felt very much like a British school, okay, and some of the stereotypes and archetypes felt very British in their own way. I just think that American high school comedies and dramas are a curiosity to us, and they're even soap-like, but they don't reflect very much who we are. And I think it's an important part of your kind of media upbringing to see yourself reflected, whatever demographic you belong to. And I think children's TV, particularly the stuff that CBBC does for all different groups, is particularly good at that. So it would be really sad to see CBBC and CBeebies disappear, reduce their content, have less money to spend because of this juggernaut coming through. So there you go, that's just my thoughts on this. Maybe it's something that's changed in the 3 years that I've been a parent. My daughter did enjoy a lot of CBeebies when she was very young, particularly Mr. Tumble, who uses Makaton sign language to talk to the children, and is a fantastic programme for real youngsters. And I look forward to my little girl growing up and watching CBBC programmes as well. But so maybe that's altered my view. But I'm more interested in what you think. Is this a concern? Do you think that Disney Plus is this kind of all good, benevolent, just high quality, high standard programming? Or do you have any concerns that some of those childhood TV shows that you loved growing up will disappear? Or do you think it's important that we keep a very British representation of what it means to grow up and be a child in Britain on our screens for young people? Read the article, let me know what you think, and hopefully I'll be able to do a couple more of these or a few more of these whilst we're in quarantine, on lockdown, whatever we want to call it. Okay, but I hope you're all well, stay safe, and hopefully I'll hear from you in the comments, and speak to you again soon. Bye bye.